actually, she heard the story on the radio on the 3rd anniversary of the tsunami. She was on the way to do her Christmas shopping, and she actually had to stop the car because she started crying. She couldn't see. And the Monday after that, she just called us all and said, "This is going to be our next movie." And I thought she had gone completely crazy. She was trying to raise the money to make a film like this in Spain. It's very difficult. But we met with Maria, who's the woman who this story is inspired in, and I just listened to her for 4 hours. She gave me, Maria's a really amazing woman. She's in touch with this kind of different sensibility after surviving something like this. And from then on, we fell in love with the story, and we decided we had to make this movie.
Now, I understand you had suffered a little bit of a traumatic experience yourself, and in the process of discussing that with Maria, that actually enabled you to bond and also to help sort of pull things out of her. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, it was the first time I just let her tell the whole story, but on our second conversation, my biggest question is, how much do you really remember, and how much do you think you have reconstructed? Because, yeah, I had actually, on the 1st anniversary of the tsunami, I was in hospital because I had this really horrible car accident. There was ice on the road, and I fell off a bridge 20 meters. And I cut the lines of the train that was going underneath. I stopped all the trains that were going to the north of Spain on Christmas Eve. So again, it's like something about life and death and Christmas. And so I asked, the thing is, I don't remember anything about the accident. Nothing. I just remember losing control of the car and then the hospital part, but that moment of falling. So I asked her, like, do you really remember what happened when the wave hit? And she actually told me that she remembered everything perfectly up to the moment when the wall of water was like 2 meters away from her, and then just holding onto that palm tree. And everything that happened under the water sort of came back to her afterwards. And so I thought that was very interesting. That was like the first point of connection, and I think that gave me the first clue on how to break from the traditional disaster movie theme and try to build on something else. It's like, so you see that moment up till the water's upon her, and then you revisit it later in the story when it's not really clear if it's a memory, if it's a shared dream with Lucas, or if it's something else. It's like there's that moment where she actually touched death and came back.
No, I gather it was a fairly prolonged development process over many, many drafts, and one of the main parts of that process was trying to find the line between fictional reality and real reality, and what you often found was that the fiction seemed more real than what actually happened.
Yes. We actually had to, there was a process of making her story, we had to tone it down. Some moments in her story were so extraordinary that we didn't dare to put them in the movie. For example, she had nightmares for years before this about a big wave taking away her children. And it's like, if we put that in the movie, nobody will believe it. And Henry had been to that same hospital 3 times, and it was so chaotic that he couldn't find her. So that's when, and we tried to put that all in just one scene. But mostly for me, the biggest challenge was to find a way to talk within the context of a story of survival, to also talk about loss and talk about the people who aren't as lucky as them. And to me, the effort was to build a story so that you could talk about loss from 5 very different perspectives. The mother who cannot allow herself to die because she has to take care of somebody else. The child who is suddenly orphaned, if only for a few hours. The father who has to take the kids, who has to send his 2 kids away out to the mountains because he fears he's going to find the dead bodies of his wife and the eldest son. So when they're on that plane and he opens that note and Lucas takes off the orphan tag and Maria realizes what that name on her arm means, it's someone who hasn't been as lucky as her. When they look out the window and see what they leave behind, it's almost as though through this microcosmos of a family, you sort of see the whole spectrum of pain they're leaving behind. So I thought it was interesting to mix that. It's like, some people told us when we turned in the first screenplay, it's like, but they get together. It's like, why does the screenplay go on for 15 more pages? And for me, that was what really was important to tell this story. There's moments when tragedy strikes, you lose all context of self, and it's like all about, you're able to access people and to be in touch with others in a way that it's very difficult when you're in the comfort of your own home. Sorry, it took too long.
How dare you? One of the details that you told me I mean, just as a sheer example of how absurd the drama of the real life could be, could you tell the story about the second plane?
Oh, yeah. There was, in the real story, Henry spent, we sort of just cut from the operation to the ambulance, and we never explained how much time they spent in the hospital between Maria's first operation and their departure. And Henry spent 2 days calling the insurance company, trying to find it, because she was still, her life was still in danger, and she had to be taken to a hospital where she could be properly have surgery. And he called so many people that by the time they got to the airport, once they boarded the first airplane, he got a phone call and he said, "Your plane is waiting for you now." And he said, "What do you mean? We're already on board." And it's like, "No, we're waiting for you on the plane." And he looked out the window, and there was another plane that the insurance company had sent. And so then he's like, he had met so many people that he tried to get all of those people on the second plane, and the insurance company just wouldn't allow it. Because they wouldn't risk if anything happened to them. So the second plane left empty. And in a way, that's what motivated trying to do all the thing with Muriel Barnes and the note and the orphan tag, because we wanted that to be in the film somehow. And yeah, that's how it
Could you talk a little bit about, you feature in the film who I suspect will become a bit of a lucky charm for you over your film career, which is Ms. Geraldine Chaplin. She, for those of you that don't know, she played a very prominent role in Sergio and Juan Antonio Bayona's first film, The Orphanage, and she is here in that very short but featured role as the woman by the side of the road. Could you talk a little bit about that scene?
That scene was my biggest fight with Bayona, because he told me, from the very beginning, he told me, "I want this film to be an experience. It's not, so I want it to be all muscle, no brain, no heart, just muscle." And I told her, "Well, it's like, heart is a muscle." And so I think we need that scene. I really felt that we needed a moment in this film. I was really worried about it being perceived the wrong way, of telling the story of a family that survives. And I really felt that we needed a moment to talk about those people who are gone. Not necessarily in a tsunami, it's just this is the encounter, the first encounter of a child with death and loss, and it's going to keep coming. So I needed that scene to be in there, and I was lucky enough to have Maria on my side, because Bayona wanted to cut it. And the minute I heard that Geraldine was going to do that scene, I was like, oh, thank God, he will never dare cut it now. She's been sort of our lucky charm, and she always gets to say what the movie's about.
Okay, we have time for just a couple of really quick questions. Okay, one question up here, Carl. What was the decision that led to the changing the nationality of the principal characters?
The very first draft of the screenplay I wrote in Spanish, because first we didn't didn't know we could make this movie. So it was just to give it to our line producer, and so that she could have a budget and see how many piggy banks we had to break to get this movie made. And so that was in Spanish, and even in that very first draft, it's like 80% of the dialogue was in English, because once the wave comes, that's the language that people would use within that context to communicate. There were tourists from all over the world, and the script ended up being in English. So when we saw that, it's like, we then decided, why just have 15 minutes of, and there's not much dialogue to begin with in the beginning of the film. So we thought it would be interesting if the family was, if it was never explained where that family is from. We know they live in a foreign country, they talk about going home, but he has a Scottish accent, she has a weird mix of New York and Australia, and the kids have different accents because they've been going to all these international schools. So we thought it would be more interesting if we never explain where they're from and make them universal, and it's just a family.
Yes, right here.
I don't have a question, I have a comment to tell you that it was an extraordinary experience seeing how you put so much love in the film and how the mother passed that love on to her son to say, this is the last thing that we do, help somebody. And that I think her son will carry for the rest of his life and pass it on to other people. So I think your message of love in the film was the most magnificent thing I've ever seen.
I think we have time for one final question. I guess over here.
Don't raise your hand if you don't have a question.